Welcome to the In the Silence podcast. I'm your host, Sandra Payne. As an RN and holistic wellness coach working with nurses, I am uniquely positioned to hear the struggles, the deep passions, and the stories of nurses, our silent heroes. Many nurses suffer with burnout, depression, anxiety, PTSD, substance abuse, and suicidality, and they do so in silence. Nurses are the ones we turn to for help when we need it the most, and this is a heavy burden for them to carry. This burden, the pervasive bullying and unsupportive culture of our healthcare system, means many nurses have lost their voice. These are their stories. My guest today is Rachel Schefflemiar. Rachel is a mother of four who enjoys fitness, hiking, soccer, photography, and musical theater. She has moved several times in her life, but has landed in Alberta since 1999 and considers it home. She has been a registered nurse in Canada for the past 17 plus years, working in a variety of settings, as many of us nurses do. Making her way as a home care pediatric nurse in the last number of years, as well as being an active union member and a passionate advocate for nurses, Rachel noticed the heavy expectations and workload creating devastation in many corners of her life. Rachel has witnessed and experienced firsthand the stigma around mental and emotional challenges and would love to see more awareness and open discussion within nursing regarding the significant suffering that many nurses are going through alone and in silence. Welcome to the show, Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I've listened to a few of these shows and they're absolutely delightful. So I'm very happy to add my voice onto this.
Yes. I'm just really honored to have you here because the more voices we hear provides such a transformation, inside of ourselves to share our stories, but also to everyone listening. So I always like to start it out by giving you a chance to share with us a little bit about yourself. So do you want to tell us a bit about your story as a nurse?
Sure. That's a pretty easy story. I went into nursing school. I think I was like 18 years old and I wasn't really quite sure what I wanted to do with myself. So it kind of literally just seemed like a good idea at the time. So I went into nursing at Grant MacEwan, which is in Edmonton. And then I finished it off with 2 years at the U of A. When I was done my training, I kind of wanted to do community health nursing, but the world just doesn't always go in the way you think it's going to go. I applied for every single community health nursing job there possibly was and didn't even get interviewed for a single one of them. So I ended up on the women's health float pool at one of the major hospitals there in Edmonton. I couldn't get a full-time job there either. So I ended up at the Stollery Children's Hospital, which is where I spent quite a few years on the float pool working a multitude of different units: medicine, surgery, cardiology, oncology, and kind of like a day ward sort of thing. Yeah, it was really good. I worked 12 hours, days, nights, met some fantastic people, and just discovered that I really do love pediatric nursing. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to balance childcare and that job. As we all know, there's not very many people that are willing to take your child for 12 hours while you work a night shift. So I ended up in home care, and I have been there pretty much ever since. I worked adult home care for a few years, and then I found my way into children's and then back to adults, and not really doing anything right now, but probably going back to children's.
I know we've connected on this piece of the story before, just around, getting into nursing and how there is a lot of nurses out there who will share that they, it's been their dream since they were a child. They always knew they were going to be a nurse. I've often looked at those people just with, this kind of envy to have known for so long what you wanted to do with your life. I know you and I are kind of similar in the sense of, it wasn't necessarily a dream, and it was just kind of like, this is one of the choices that we have. And, I go back to when my mom said to me, I was in my first year of university at the University of Winnipeg, and she was like, you need to do something with yourself. You need to get you need to figure out where it is that you want to go. And I was like, well, I don't know what I want to do. And she said, well, why don't you become a nurse? And I was like, okay. End of story. Here I was going into nursing. And I know you've shared a little bit about it being like, those approved sort of pink jobs that women get into, right? So thank you. Yeah, for sharing that about your story as a nurse. But tell me, in all the years that you've been working throughout all these different areas, what's been some of the biggest struggles that you've faced as a nurse?
I would have to say my biggest struggle as a nurse has just, and I think a lot of other people can relate with this, is I always felt like I didn't quite fit in. There's kind of this idea of there's a nursing mold, or I heard another group like a persona that you had to hold as a nurse. And I'm not terribly professional. I don't think I ever intend to be professional, and I'm more personable. And I like to find connections with my clients and with my families. And that doesn't necessarily fit into kind of the mold of where I feel nursing is kind of going, where we're just very fast paced. We're very impersonal. We're very almost like we're trying to automate us. And I always felt like this pressure on me to stuff all of those feelings. Because in one hand, they're saying, look at this person holistically, but on the other hand, but not too holistically, because that's going to take too long. And you're probably going to unbury some things that we don't really want to deal with. That's not our job. So I always felt that I never had enough time or resources to do what I really wanted to do with my job. And it always was a struggle for me.
I don't know if you've caught that there's a video going around on Facebook. It's a YouTube video of a doctor in the United States, and he's talking about moral injury. When I watched that video, and I'll post the link in the show notes for anyone who hasn't seen it. When I watched that video, it was like, there was pieces of it I didn't really like, but also it really connected to, giving a name to what I felt and what it sounds like you felt. And I think so many nurses feel is that we're really limited in how we can show up for people. It has become much more of an automated system where we're just, ticky boxes and computerized charting, and everything is just very fast paced and super, unrealistic expectations on us that takes us away from that human connection, which is why I believe so many of us are in this kind of work, is because we want to help. We want to help heal and be there for people in their time of need. So tell me a little bit about how this has affected you. Does it feel aligned to call it moral injury? Does that feel right for you?
Yeah, I have looked a bit into moral injury, after the fact, and it does certainly put a name to a lot of the feelings that I have felt over the years. Just that powerlessness that you see something and you'd love to make a difference, but you don't have the ability to do so. Sometimes it's time and resources, or even just boundaries, right? Like there are certain boundaries that are very good to have as a nurse, but also some of those boundaries can keep you from, reaching people maybe at a level where you think would be a little bit more therapeutic.
Such an interesting point to bring up, the boundaries piece. But before we get there, I just want to go back to when I say how this moral injury, or even if there was more to it, right? Like with maybe burnout or worse, or other, sort of mental, emotional struggles that come with all of this. How did you notice it in yourself? Like what was coming up for you? How did it start to show up for you in your life?
It comes on very slowly and insidiously. And I think that's the biggest reason why I wanted to speak at this podcast at this time, because I am in no way, shape, or form over a recent moral injury. I'm still in the muck and mire of it. And it took me a long time to realize it for what it was, because you can find ways to make it seem like a regular part of life, like for instance, tired. Well, I work long hours. That's why I'm always so tired. I can't get to sleep at night. Well, I've got lots on my mind. That's why I can't get to sleep at night. Oh, my stomach's upset. Maybe it's that coffee that I had in the morning. Oh, I just can't think clearly. I'm just really, really struggling. Well, it's probably because I didn't have my lunch today or yesterday or the day before, and I have a lot on my mind. So you can rationalize all of these little symptoms. Oh, I have a headache. Well, I usually have a headache. But when you step back and start looking at the whole picture, you see that you're not okay. It's not normal for you to get up every morning and have a sense of dread to going into work. Even looking at my phone or looking at my computer, I would just be like, complete panic. I couldn't go to sleep. I usually work Tuesday to Friday, and Monday night, I would just be looking at my phone, checking my emails. My phone would be just binging off with everybody just trying to get, because I have a caseload, and I wouldn't sleep all night Monday because I was so panicked waiting for Tuesday. And it was taking over my entire life. And I took my husband, he sat me down and he was like, you know what? You're not yourself. You're very irritable. You're snappy. You don't seem to be enjoying life. and you are, you're surviving, but you're not thriving, I guess is the best way to put it. On a day-to-day basis, it doesn't seem that much different. It's almost like you need someone to call you out on it, because you get your head down and you start working and you don't even see it yourself.
Mm-hmm. I think it becomes really hard to see because you're purely in that survival mode, right? Which is not a clear place, and it's not a place of reflection or any kind of introspection either. So I've heard this from other nurses too, is like, it's kind of like a sneaky little bastard, this burnout or whatever you want to call it. Like, it just, because it becomes so normalized that we feel this way. And when we look at the stats of nurses who are struggling right now in particular, it's become normalized that we're experiencing burnout, for lack of a better word, right? So, it's a part of the job that you're going to be tired. It's a part of the job that you're going to be, emotionally overwhelmed. It's a part of the job that you may have some physical manifestations of things. You might have headaches, you might have, GI problems, you might have chest pain, you might have anxiety, you probably have depression. It's just become accepted. And so when we have an outside person, someone who knows us, who has seen us, through many, many years of our life, and they can pinpoint and say, like, you're not okay. Sometimes it's almost like they've given us permission to say, like, oh my God, I'm not okay, because we hide it. So tell me, why do you think we hide? Why do you think we hold it back and we just, we have these little signals that are telling us that things are not okay? Why do you think we are so resistant to, for showing up for ourselves, for stepping up and saying, I need help, I need to, take a step back, or anything like that, I need support? Why do you think we're so resistant to that?
Well, easy. It's the stigma of it. And I felt it when I decided that and it really wasn't like, when I say I decided, when you are at that point where you are in burnout or you cannot function any further, it's usually not a decision that you make. It's usually a decision that your body makes for you. And for me, it was my body would not let me do anymore. It wouldn't let me work anymore. It wouldn't let me do anything. It just shut down. You don't want to get there, number one. But the stigma of it is so intense that it keeps a lot of people in the dark. I'm sure that if we felt, safe enough that we could talk amongst ourselves about these topics, we would find that we're not alone in this. A lot of us are feeling these things towards the day, but we just don't feel safe to admit that, we're not doing well, and to even admit it's a mental health issue. We can deal with physical health issues a lot more easily than we can deal with having a mental health issue. It makes it look like you're not able to do your job, that you're weak, that you're not resilient enough, which I've come to have a love and hate relationship with the word. You are not able to rationalize that what you're thinking and what you're feeling. There's so much misinformation about mental health out there that I would just love to blow up, because it has held me back for years for getting help, because I wanted to see like I was someone that could beat this on my own, something I could go to the gym every day and run off, or be organized enough. But at the end of the day, you need actual help. You need mental health help. And you need to spend that time of inside reflection and deal with the trauma before you can move on and get some better coping mechanisms.
I, 100% agree with you. The stigma is what keeps most people from sharing any kind of concern or, any kind of challenge that isn't visible to other people, because you can't prove, aside from what your experience is, right? Like, they have all these questionnaires and everything, but I've said this before, if I cut my arm off, I don't need to prove to you that I can't come to work. I don't need to prove to you that I'm not fit to practice. But if we have a mental health injury, there is this whole heavy, heavy burden that comes with trying to prove to people that you need time, that you need healing, that you need real help. The stigma is, I would love to blow it up with you, because for so much of my life, I lived with that, with just this belief that's tied to it, that there's something wrong with you, that there's some kind of personal failing in you. Never mind, it's the system that is failing us. But it becomes something that we wear as a badge of failure. on ourselves when we're struggling in this way. I just want to go back to what you said, how it doesn't become a choice that you make, your body makes it for you. I think that is, just such a genius statement, because you're absolutely right. It is your body is sending you these little signals that are easy to ignore for many reasons, right? For many reasons, we ignore them because we've normalized them, or we don't think they're bad enough, or we think that if I go and get help for this little thing, like it's not that bad yet. We compare to other people's pain or to other people's trauma, but eventually your body is like, okay, you're not listening to me. I'm going to get real loud with you now, because something's got to get your attention. And so it shows up in lots of different ways. People end up in emergency room with chest pain, or, or a heart attack, or worse, or, there's a whole range of things that can show up for people. So, we need to be listening to these little signs, and to end the stigma that is around mental and emotional health, particularly for healthcare providers, because it is hitting us at a much more alarming rate than the general public, who is hit at a pretty alarming rate already. What would be something that you would maybe say to some of your colleagues, or to your peers, or other nurses? What would you say to them if they are having some of these little subtle signs, right? Or maybe not so subtle, but they know something's not quite right. They know that they need some help. What would you say to those people?
I would say it'd be not a bad idea when you notice kind of these little symptoms pop up, maybe make a list of it. That's what I did for myself, which kind of threw it up in my face that, okay, yeah, the onesie twosie little things are starting to add together. And so then you can actually step back and see, okay, it's not just this, not just this, not just this, not just that. And even more importantly, don't isolate yourself. It's very easy when you are in a place of burnout, moral distress, depression, anxiety, whatever sort of mental health issue that you're dealing with, to want to go inside of yourself and to isolate yourself. But if you can remember my words, don't. That's when you need to reach out the most. That's when you need to find those people in your life where they will tell you the truth. And I hope that most people have those people in their lives. And if you don't, then that you need to access a professional to sit down and have some discussions with you. I know we tend to focus a lot, even in our profession, on physical health, but our mental health is paramount, if not the most treasured health that we can maintain. Because if your mental health isn't on track, nothing is on track. And we need our mental health, obviously, to do our job, but we need it more importantly to do our lives.
Yes. Tell me, Rachel, when you think back to your past experiences with, burnout or moral injury or psychological injury, whatever we want to call it, there's multiple names and words we can use, of course. But when you think back to past experiences and where you're at now, what would be some of the most helpful resources or tools or supports that you have found that you'd like to share with everyone?
I think out of all of the things that I've accessed, my favorite thing has been my peer support group. My therapy is amazing. Medications, let's not discount medications. Medications might also be a tool that can be very instrumental, but support and talking with like-minded people that are experiencing the same thing is just absolutely magical. And it kind of brings you out of that isolated area where you don't feel like anyone understands you or that you're alone. And that's sort of where all of these dark feelings like to breed, so to speak. But when you sit down with a group and all of those things that kind of stay in the dark, and you feel comfortable enough to bring those darkness into the light, it is wonderful. It is the most healing and freeing experience. I have to credit that to even my awareness of where I was mentally, because I could have just kept going on the same path. But I am very blessed to have people in my circle that are wonderful mentors and good friends that have just been instrumental with me, but leading me the whole way. And I have to say Sandra is one of them.
And I'm so grateful that you're a part of everything that we're doing with that program. I want to highlight that because there seems to be a lot of things kind of coming out of the woodworks in the last year, of course, myself being one of them, but also just with the same thread, which is nurse-led support, peer-led support, because anyone who's ever gone to a counselor, any nurse who's ever gone to a counselor, it is frustrating at times, I will say, to have to explain to somebody what it's like to be a nurse, because people don't know. The general public doesn't really have a hot clue what it's like to be a nurse, to what you go through on a daily basis, the kind of emotional investment that we have in these people's lives, and the trauma and the impact it has on our heart. You know, when things are not going well, when you're seeing someone struggling or in pain, those things, we carry them with us. And I think the general public doesn't really have a good grasp on that. And so sometimes when you seek support and you get somebody who's just in a pool of resources that doesn't know the intricacies and the depths of what it is to be a nurse, that's a barrier. And I know I felt it a lot in my career accessing the programs, and I'm not trying to knock them, because I think, of course, counseling and psychological support are extremely beneficial for people. But the peer support, you're right, it's something magical, because what I often kind of say is, you know, after a few sessions or a few, you know, meetings where you've been with a group of people, a consistent group, I think is really important also. So you can build that trusting relationship with each other. You know, I often say, like, I start to see in our groups that I run the armor dropping, the swords being laid down on the table. And it's like this refreshing relief to just be able to be real, to just not have to wear this tense protection around us, because really it's a trauma response. It's from being stuck in that fight and flight mode for just about every single day. To have a space where you can just let it out, where you can just drop it down and just be real, where you can cry, where you can laugh, where you can share experiences, and, you know, and you can have that kind of real human connection with people who get it, people who are along the same lines, and who are honestly, most of us, swimming towards the same goals too. So it does truly provide something absolutely magical. And I really am grateful and honored to be in the role that I'm in. But it's also super exciting to just see all these different groups kind of coming about to support each other, because we need it. We really do. It is apparent the system cannot function without people to work in it. But the people that are working in it we're dropping, right? We're leaving, and leaving the profession, leaving our jobs, but also leaving because we're ill. You know, these kinds of support systems, just, I think they are paramount right now for us to capitalize on and create more of, because one person cannot access everyone. So the more of us that are stepping up to this role is just, it's super important. And it's just such a gift really to be in this kind of a role. So of course, it's not all bad. Nursing is not all bad, because something keeps us coming back, right? So tell me a little bit about what you would say has been the biggest success or the biggest achievement. What has kept you coming back all these years?
Probably a lot of it is the other nurses. I have some really amazing friendships in this little community, and in home care and in the children's hospital that I worked. I have some really amazing friends, and just working with them is a total pleasure. I love being with them. They reflect so many good things into my life. Just being with them it's why I keep going back. And if I could give shout outs, I'd give shout outs. I have some really amazing friendships. And of course, my patients. I love my patients. My favorite part about nursing is when you have a family or a patient that is going through something that is terrifying to them, and you're able to, in your little small way, make it a little less terrifying, a little bit more manageable, a little bit more human. And that's the most important thing to me, is to be a little human. Because I know often you're going through a crisis. And because I do a lot of pediatrics, a lot of the things that I see are quite sad. If you can just bring a little bit of light, a little bit of levity, a little bit of humanness to something that's just overwhelming and seems almost too much to take on, then yeah, I feel like that is just an honor.
Mm-hmm. As you're talking, I'm reminded of times in my career, and I know other people, I'm sure listening, it happens for them too. But, you know, I was thinking about in the NICU, how for Halloween, we used to dress up the babies in their own little Halloween costumes, and parents would come in that day, and the babies are on ventilators, and we need humor. Like we need to not make light of the situation. That's not what we're doing, but like create light in a dark situation.
Absolutely.
I'm just remembering some of those sweet little things with their little costumes on. Do you have any story that kind of stands out to you of where you were, in one of those really dark times and you were able to bring some light to that situation that you feel like you'd like to share?
I think early in my career, I definitely had a lot more energy for nursing. I mean, you have kids yourself and you start working a lot and going home and not having that rest in between shifts. So it gets a bit harder than it is when you're a brand new baby nurse. I know when I was a brand new baby nurse, I used to be excited every single day I went to work. And I remember playing video games on the words with the kids, like playing like Super Mario and like showing them how it was done and cuddling babies while I was charting. I remember after my first son was born, I remember how some of those trach vented kids, they only had those striped pajamas to wear, and it broke my heart. And my son had so many clothes that I remember bringing in my son's clothes that were too small for him and then dressing the babies in his clothes. They looked like babies instead of like the linmates. I don't know if they allow them to do that anymore, but I know the nurses, especially on the medicine ward, were very, very much trying to make them into little people instead of little patients, and to make it like they were just as important and or as treasured, because we did see some babies that didn't get to see their families for long periods of time. I don't know, multiple different reasons. So they really needed that caregiving, almost like a parent figure in their lives, and we were more than happy to oblige. So they became more like our babies. We've spoiled them rotten.
I can remember some of those situations, right? More so, there's a real social complex happening that's preventing family, or, family has chosen not to be involved for whatever reasons. And those little babies become the units. And I'm just often reminded of so many things, especially when we talk about babies, because that was such a big chunk of my career. But even recalling report and giving report to physicians, some of those kind of left behind babies, which is just tragic and painful to even just know that exists, but to be there with those poor little souls and saying to a doctor, like, I don't think she needs anything else but love. And like, it just still makes me emotional thinking of those sweet little things that just, all they needed was someone to hold them and cuddle them. And I love how you're saying, you brought in clothes to the unit so that the kids could, get out of those hospital clothes, just to make it more human. Those kinds of things are truly what keep, I think, most of us coming back to the job. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for, as always, triggering me back into my days on the floor. I kind of like this question, but if you could think back to when you first started as a nurse, like when you were that excited, as you said, baby nurse, knowing what you know now and what you've been through now, what would be some of the advice you might give her just starting out?
Don't go into nursing. Just joking.
Kidding, not kidding.
Just kidding, not kidding. Find something where your heart's not going to get ripped out all the time. Honestly, I really, really, really wish I would have known a lot more about mental health in those days, and boundaries, but like healthy boundaries, and even knowing how to take care of myself. I was very sacrificial. I still am, where I gave out of everything in myself to make sure that my patients got what they needed, or what I thought they needed, but I didn't do anything to take care of my own self. And I never left my work at work. I wish I would have told myself that a long time ago. Like, honey, they're not thinking about you when you leave those doors. So stop thinking about them all the time. Don't be dragging your work into every little conversation that you have. Don't be checking your phone every 5 minutes to see if there's any emails. Don't be working on your days off. Leave your work at work and have your home at home, and have really clear-cut boundaries between the two. And also, I think it's a good thing to note that there is definitely a personality dynamic in nursing that I did not anticipate. I did not anticipate the type of personalities that I was going to be put up against. I don't know if there's anything I could have done to protect myself from that, but I do think that there are a lot more and better resources out there about what we should and should not tolerate. And I know I tolerated a lot of very awful things for very long just because I didn't know any better. I thought that it was just a me problem, not a them problem reflecting onto me. You know, that whole nurses eat their young sort of thing. I think we could definitely do better in that regard. Absolutely. And when we say the system, I think we're all part of this system, and myself included. I have sat back and watched other people get bullied and been too afraid to say something. So I think it needs to be mentioned that if we're really serious about ending the culture and creating a better, more healthy culture in nursing, that includes ourselves. That includes what we're going to tolerate and not tolerate for other people, and standing in the gap for other people.
Yeah, such an amazing point. It reminds me of, the fact that we literally are the only thing that we can change. So why not put our attention there, right? And own our behavior and own our actions. And, I think a lot of what we do in the program, but also just a part of personal development is, learning how to stand in your truth and learning how to stand up for yourself and to stand up for what you value. And you've mentioned boundaries a few times. And that's, I think a big part of it is knowing where you stand, knowing what is important to you and what you value, and then being willing to step up and do something when those boundaries become infringed upon. And it's not an easy thing whatsoever on the outside to be watching that kind of behavior or to be a victim of that kind of behavior, but it's also not easy to stand up for that kind of behavior. But unless one of those things shifts, or all of them, nothing is going to change. So you're absolutely right. Like, the system involves us. It's not just the people making decisions about policies and staffing and all that kind of stuff. It's the people on the floor. It's the people who are working the job that need to take these honest looks at ourselves and think of how could I be showing up, in a different way? How could I be showing up for myself in a different way too? So is there anything more you want to share about like this boundaries piece that you've mentioned?
I think boundaries it's a bit mystical, right? When people are like, keep your boundaries, they use that word to meaning when you're a professional robot nurse, you're living within your boundaries. But as soon as you become a caring, empathetic, holistic practicing nurse, you're not working within your boundaries. And I would like to say that you could have issues with boundaries being both types of nurses. And I'm not going to downplay nurses that are very procedural and maybe not as what we call bleeding heart, like the likes of us. There's a place for them in the world. There's a place for every type of nurse in the world. And I think that the thought that you have to be a certain personality blend to be a nurse is complete hogwater. There's a place for every type of nurse. There's so many different facets of nursing that we all kind of have our place. But when I think about boundaries, I just think about what you are able to do in that moment that kind of makes you feel it's an internal boundary crossing. When you know it for yourself, and what might be a boundary for you might not be a boundary for somebody else, if that makes any sense. Aside, of course, from professional boundaries according to our college and all of our sort of legislative practice, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking more like internal emotional boundaries. I think those are something that we need to be honoring and protecting a lot more.
And open to the variety, because you're right. Like, just because I don't follow or fall into the cookie cutter of what you believe should be right or should be how a nurse behaves or acts or treats their patients, just because I don't fall into that mold doesn't mean that what I'm doing is wrong. Because inside of me, speaking for myself personally, but for lots of nurses, inside of us, we have what is important to us, and to have that connection with people and to spend those extra moments holding someone's hand, even if you have charting to be done and maybe your charting suffers because of it, but you spent that moment because that's important to you. If you were to step away from that situation and be like, sorry, I can't sit here with you. I can't listen to this story. I can't listen to your problems right now because I have other things to do. That's infringing on your own boundary also, right? So it's saying that what is important to you isn't valid and it's not important. That was a bit of a double negative there, but I think you get where I was going. So I think boundaries come into play in so many ways. And you're right, it does become a little bit of a watered down word when we're just like, you need to set boundaries because, okay, well, what does that mean though? And that means something different for everybody.
Yeah, it's not like a checklist. And I think that's one of the biggest kind of problems when we're in a caring profession is that you can't just make a checklist. And we love algorithms and we love checklists and we love policies and procedures. We have them for everything. We're like every color of the rainbow type of nurse out there. And you can't just color it with one color. You need to be using all the colors. In pediatrics, you know how like one person does a dressing change a little bit different than the other person. At the end of the day, the dressing gets changed. One of their older nurses, she's just like, it's like changing a diaper. You know, just because you might not change the diaper exactly the way the next person changes the diaper, at the end of the day, the diaper gets changed. So I feel like there needs to be more room for that in nursing, for variety and for diversity. And then maybe, you know, we'll let each other bloom and blossom and be our authentic, true selves at work instead of having to feel like you have to put on, you know, your nurse face versus your real face. Our patients know when we're not being authentic. They know when we're just regurgitating something back to them, but we don't really truly believe it in our hearts. And yeah, there's sometimes we do have to do that. But I think if you're authentic, it is such a blessing to everything and everybody around you.
Yeah, you're so right. I think it's truly the gift that we have to give to everyone is for each and every one of us to peel back the layers and be exactly who we are, our true authentic self, right? Which is also has become a bit of a watered down word too. But when you really think about it, it's a very deep concept because there's a lot of layers in front of that true self. There's a lot of fear in front of that true self that we have to work through, you know, not just get over, but work through in order for us to really show up in that authentic way. So yeah, there's so much here. It's such an amazing conversation. I'm curious if there is, you know, anything else that you feel like you'd like to share with the listeners.
My opinion, and you know, my opinion probably doesn't mean a whole lot. I've only been nursing for maybe 16 years now, which is really a drop in the hat. I know lots of nurses that have been nursing longer than I've been alive, and my kudos to them. It's a tough profession. I do feel though that not being able to be yourself at work is massively difficult. And I would like to just let people know that if they feel like they are not free to being themselves or they don't know who they are, I think that's a really good clue that it's probably time for you to sit back and do some self-care and do some self-reflection and take an inventory of how you're doing and how you're feeling. Because that is when our mental health really does suffer. When we are being placed into, you know, boxes or even something internal, we place ourselves into a box of what we have to be or say or do or whatever. At the end of the day, it's going to cause you grief because you have to die to that true self. And you can only die to your true self for so long before you can't find that person anymore. So now that I'm forced to self-reflect, you're right. We are also holding back so much from this world. There's so much ingenuity and creativity and even just expressions of nursing that could be exhibited that we're probably holding back ourselves because we're afraid of expressing ourselves. So yeah, I just like to encourage everybody out there to just let themselves be authentic. Even if it means you kind of have to step outside your comfort zone.
Which is always easier said than done, right? As you know so well.
I love my comfort zone.
Yeah, don't we all? And you know what? I've come to think of it with another word actually, and I've been calling it our trauma box because the comfort zone is quite the same. It's, you know, it's the box that we stay within so that we don't have to experience some of the painful, risky, fearful things that we think are going to happen, or we have expectations are going to happen, or will trigger like, you know, old wounds, which I know you mentioned trauma before, and it's honestly, it's a whole other conversation for sure, because it's such a big piece of this. But I think, in my opinion, I'm quite on the same page as you, is that if we are disconnecting from our truth, from our true selves, and we find ourselves in a place where we feel so lost or stuck or trapped or just like, I don't even know who I am anymore, that disconnection is what I believe to be is like the primary cause of mental illness. And as we navigate our way back, it's not a rainbow bridge. It's not an easy path. It takes a lot of work, takes a lot of support to get your way there. But I think, part of this podcast purpose and everything that I'm doing and trying to share is just to let people know that there is support out there. You don't have to go through this on your own. If you're struggling, take an inventory of where you're at, check yourself, be honest with yourself about things, talk to somebody about it, someone that you love, someone who you trust, talk to them about how you're feeling, ask them for their opinion, their honest opinion about where they think you're at, talk to your doctors, talk to a therapist, get a counselor, reach out, join different Facebook groups or different peer support groups that exist, but don't just isolate and hold yourself back and just hope that it gets better, because it doesn't get better. It gets worse.
And if you're doing okay, that's great. That's fantastic. But don't judge others that aren't. Everyone's going through something that you can't see. Just because mental health is, like you said, an invisible struggle. So please don't judge other people. Just act with kindness.
Mm-hmm. What a beautiful note to end on. Act with kindness. Thank you so much for being here, Rachel.
No, thank you.
I personally want to thank you for taking your time to listen to this podcast. It is my truest honor to sit with these nurses and witness them tell parts of their story. We as human beings have a deep need to be seen and heard, and this is my way of helping nurses in particular find their voice. Please know that the opinions shared in this podcast are those of the individuals sharing them and not a reflection of any employer or regulatory body. We are sharing our truth, and that may not always resonate with you, but I'm guessing if you're listening, that something has rung true for you in this podcast. Our stories offer healing and create connection, two things that we as nurses need as we navigate the jungle of a healthcare career. So thank you for being witness. And if you feel inclined to reach out to the guest on today's episode to offer validation and appreciation, you can always find their contact in the show notes, as well as other links to the offerings of Sandra Payne Wellness. If you'd like to be a part of the community, join our private Facebook group, Surviving Nursing. And if you'd like to share your story on the End the Silence podcast, be sure to reach out. When we can come out of the shadows and into our light, we can create the change that is needed. And when we do this work together, we are so much stronger. Thank you for listening.